Chapter 4. The Physatek Flurhot Relocation Plan. The Ov lived out their lives in artificial environments. To them, the concepts of morning and night were not dictated by the relative positions of a planet and its sun, as for landworlders. The Ov did, however, recognize the merits of every member of a community going about their work at the same time, so the words are morning and gore, night remained in parlance for convenience's sake. Ar was the period of time before the day's on-board labors began, and Gore, the period after. It was a different story, on the other hand, for the Gahoriak, bridge personnel. Aboard a warship, at least one person had to be on duty at all times. The lifestyles of bridge personnel, which only flight branch star pilots could be, were segmented into three distinct categories. On vessels like the assault ship Bosroer, where there were only 3 flight branch star pilots, if any one of them were absent, then having someone on duty at all times became considerably rougher. That was one reason it was the 2 non-flight branch star pilots, Jin of the budget branch and Samson of the mechanics branch, who had touched down on Lobnus too. Due to that, it was only really when they entered or left a port, or during battle, that every star pilot was together. It wasn't uncommon for a given star pilot to never come across another given star pilot thanks to their differing work hours. Being aboard a ship was an Ov's every day. Their time outside of work hours was precious indeed. Yet Lafier was making sure to be on the bridge as much as possible, even while off duty. And that was because the bridge of the assault ship Bosroer was also her manor as the interim leech. "Are you not tired?" asked senior star pilot Sabash, whose shift it actually was. "Not particularly," answered Lafier, intending for that response to come across as natural as can be. But Sabash wasn't convinced. "I can call you as soon as anything pops up. Might I suggest you go rest? The only difference is whether I'm sitting in my room or in the captain's room. Either way, I tire out at the same rate." "Well, that may be true, but am I getting in the way here?" she asked, not sarcastically, but honestly. "No, of course not. I just remember what happened all that time ago. Yes, when I went out to engage in trade for the first time, I mean. I could have gotten into it after serving as a Royal Bigak, vice navigator, or some such on a large vessel somewhere, but I borrowed money from my father and rented a ship, just like that. It was a small ship, of course. And back then, I couldn't leave the bridge, no matter what. Did you sleep there, too?" "Yes," said Sabash, nodding bashfully. "I napped in the captain's seat. The crew warned me, but I wouldn't listen, and when the all-important bargaining got underway, I was tottering on my feet. I took so much in losses. I get plenty of sleep in my room." "You're certainly better than I used to be," he smiled. "It's been 5 years since I was appointed, and more than a year since I first saw formal battle. All the more reason I feel you should give yourself a little more room to breathe." "I see you, too, would treat me like a child," pouted Lafier. "Far from it. I just can't stand by and say nothing to the next generation, understand? Just can't stand by?" The royal princess frowned. If her subordinates harbored misgivings about her, then she had a big problem on her hands. And to be honest, the young woman I'm watching is, in her eagerness, stretching herself thin. Am I being too zealous? That's what it looks like to me. She had no intention of acting with single-minded zeal. After all, she wasn't thrilled to be saddled with the role of lady agent to begin with. She just wanted to properly carry out the mission she was assigned, and that was what she thought she'd been doing. She didn't view herself as particularly ardent about it. "What do you do when you're alone?" asked Lafier. Truth be told, she wasn't quite sure what she was supposed to be doing when resting. Ekriua was most likely asleep, and even if she wasn't exactly a scintillating conversationalist. There were star pilots who could carry lively conversations with NCCs. On the Bosroer, there were 2, Samson and Jint. But Lafier could never hope to emulate them. She was always aware how on guard her potential chatting partners got around her. And if she wasn't wrong, it'd be difficult for Sabash and Ekriua too. Speaking with landers had to be a tricky art to master for everyone who just so happened to have blue hair and spatiosensory perception. Be that as it may, she also didn't care to spend all of her time by her lonesome, diligently crafting something or other. That was why she was interested in what Sawbash did when alone. That is a very personal question, smiled Sawbash. Was it untoward of me to ask? Forgive me. No, I have nothing to hide. The senior star pilot's grin grew wider. For your information, I dictate letters. Every day? Yes, every day. One after the other, to the people I know. Also, though I'm currently on the battlefront, I also have some business to attend to. There are administrative things to take note of. Do you not get tired of it? Writing the letters isn't as fun as getting the replies back. Whenever I send a letter, it's because I want to hear back from the recipient. It's a good way to keep my relationships with people from crumbling away, too. What do you mean, crumbling away? You can be quite close to someone, but if you don't interact for long stretches of time, that familiarity can only dissipate over time. But with the magic of correspondence, you don't need to meet face-to-face to interact. So now I know that my funeral will be a boisterous affair, he laughed. I don't think I can expect you or the others to attend, though we seem to be seeing each other every single day as of late, Captain. You're right, said Lafier, smiling as well. The crew was staking their lives on the ship, and that was doubly the case for a small vessel like an assault ship. Were Sawbash to die in battle, then it would be because the boss roar had been shot to ruins. And in that case, none of the other members would survive either. By the way, are you really sure you don't want to go rest? I would much rather keep chatting with you, said Lafier, resting her chin in her hands. To take my mind off the boredom. I'm technically supposed to be on duty, said Sawbash, though he didn't seem bothered by the prospect at all. Only technically, surely? Yes, only technically, he answered. But that was when they heard the incoming call ringtone. A call from the surface. It's Rearguard Lynn. Put it through, said Lafier, getting to her feet. The video came up, and in it, Jint looked haggard. Lady Agent, this is your Lady Agent Adjunct, calling from the land world. That was blindingly obvious, but Lafier nodded. What's the matter? Remember the relocation thing? They've reached a conclusion. They really will be emigrating. The itinerary's set, so I'll be sending it over. Understood. At any rate, you look a little exhausted. I'm more than a little exhausted. Should I go down there too? Jin seemed taken aback, but soon he was shaking his head. No, it's fine. Better if you stay up there. Okay. She did have tasks to see to aboard the boss roar. If she left, then the burden on Sawbash and Ekriwa's shoulders would balloon. The first batch is projected to be 12,000 people. We'll be ferrying people from the surface into orbit using the Daxaith a bunch of times. Hope the preparations for the supply ships that'll be taking them past that point will go all right. I tried asking, and they said that since they're for transporting goods, they're not made to receive passengers, said Lafier, relaying the words of the transport unit commander with her arms folded. And 12,000 is too many. 8,000 is the occupancy limit. Judging by Jin's face, this was an unpleasant surprise. Then are you going to arrange for a new ship? I suppose I have no other choice. I'll send out a conveyance ship without delay. I will have the first 8,000 board ship, though. But didn't you say they're not built to receive passengers? Meaning it won't be a pleasant journey for them. They'll need to bear with it for around 10 days. Jint groaned in response. I'll try persuading him. Though if he doesn't give the nod, it'll just delay their flight out of here. Could I get the files on the ship's occupant habitability? Sure. I'll have the SYMH Saliger transport unit send them to you directly. Thanks. One more thing. I just got the Land World Citizen Representative Succession Ranking List, which I'll send you as well. They'd like us to keep the existence of the succession rankings from the inmates, let alone what they are. Is that a record of who will be citizen representative after the current Land World administration leaves? Nope. Mr. Madine's a prudent man. The list details who will have to head up their emigration should something ever happen to him. If the guards make their way out, then the list becomes irrelevant. Understood. Prudent is good, she thought. Right, well, I'll probably have to call you again in a bit, but I'm going to drop the line for now. Lafier nodded, and when she sat herself back down, the video disappeared. Jint breathed a sigh of relief. Thank the stars Lafier agreed to stay in orbit. The situation on this world was complicated enough as it stood. He then exited the communications room, which was what he called this little room. While all he needed to communicate was his wrist gear in order to transmit messages he didn't want the Land World citizens to overhear, He needed a room he knew was not wiretapped. And the other great thing about the room? How very close it was to the conference room. The second he stepped foot into the conference room, the eyes of all assembled inside fell on him at once. Maydeen and the two self-professed star system premiers had been waiting for him. Anguzen had declined to attend, or perhaps more accurately, was ignoring it, since he hadn't responded to Maydeen's attendance request at all. Along the right wall stood the NCC's under mechanics Lie Wing Samson. I hope, for my sake and theirs, they're enjoying this bodyguard mission, thought Jint. I hope it doesn't become an actual bodyguard mission. Samson certainly seemed to be enjoying it. In fact, bearing a holster heavy with a light gun appeared to stir wistful memories of his homeworld. As to why his homeworld and light guns were so connected, Jint had neglected to ask. Along the left wall stood Maydeen's armed prison guards, all wearing cantankerous expressions. And at the back stood the prisoners, who were evidently there to guard Dokfu and Shunger's respective persons. Their presence was demanded by the self-proclaimed premiers as a condition for their attendance, and was a factor in the delaying of this conference, too. Being prisoners, they were unarmed. The fact that they couldn't possibly be armed was a formal stance both the prison administration and the prisoner population agreed on. Despite that, Dokfu hinted at a request to be lent arms, but Maydeen staunchly refused. "How did it go, Lady Agent Adjunct, Your Excellency?" asked Maydeen. 12,000 is too many for the ship currently in orbit. We can take up to 8,000 for the first batch. Jint didn't give them a moment to interject. He knew it was best to bear all of the bad news up front. Also, the ship's habitability is awful. I think it'd be a better idea to wait for a ship that's made to carry people, like a passenger ship. Though it'll most likely end up being a military-use personnel supply ship. If you can only accommodate 8,000, then how about telling us that from the jump, said Maydeen. The 12,000 slated to be the first batch comprised the entirety of the private citizenry, including the shopkeepers and the administrative staff members' families. This meant that as chief executive, Maydeen had to revise the selection standard so as to leave 4,000 people behind. Jint supposed it was only natural he'd be upset. If you're not in too much of a hurry, might I suggest waiting for a more suitable ship, suggested Jint. As I've said over and over, the two ships in orbit are supply ships handling goods. And while it would certainly be less expensive for the Star Forces, if you actually decide to use them, I see Your Excellency is a straight talker, said Shunger. After all, you could have just kept that to yourself and thrown us in a ship storage sector to do the job on the cheap. But instead, you're sending for a ship for us. You're all already cherished land-world citizens of the Empire, said Jint. So, if the administration people are passing on the first batch, could you take us instead? Said Shunger. Who said we're passing on it? Erupted Maydeen. And this is the first I've heard of you lot leaving the planet. It would be. I never had a chance to tell you before now. Allow me to say it loud and clear. We, the residents of the West Correctional Zone, will evacuate Lobnus 2 and leave this star system. Jint wished he could hold his head in his hands. Now he had another misery-inducing obstacle to deal with. That cannot be allowed, said Maydeen, red in the face. You are criminals. And criminals must atone for their sins. And now you'd have your freedom, just like that? Do you think nothing of your victims' desire for justice? The folks locked up in this joint aren't the type to be looking deep inside themselves, Shunger quipped sarcastically. Not on this far-flung rock. And would you be fine with that, Count? Said Maydeen, facing Jint's way. Letting criminals loose? I'd have to ask a specialist in the law before getting back to you with anything definitive, but I think that's probably out of our hands. The ladies and gentlemen here weren't convicted under imperial law, and they would be transferred to a prison camp anyway. The only real problem lies in the right of the land world administrations to vet who gets to relocate. I hate to break it to you, but Jint looked at Shunger and Dokfu. Please go on. You don't have to worry about us, said Dokfu, smiling broadly. Jint could tell he was grinning to hide his naturally frenzied-looking face. Well, I just don't think there are worlds out there that welcome folks with criminal records. The prison camp is fine, asserted Shunger. Anywhere's paradise compared to this hopeless, miserable planet. You said society on a prison camp planet is the same as any other planets, didn't you? Maydeen persisted. They'll commit more crimes there, too, given the chance. Does that really sit well with you? Is the Empire powerless to stop that? Or does the Empire just not concern itself with crime on land worlds? The Empire probably doesn't care much, no. But Jin took another tack. As far as I've been told, depending on the character of the camp, problems can arise with some regularity, so penal law tends to be on the stricter end of the spectrum. Exactly how strict are we talking? Said Maydeen, dubious. Jin spoke the question into his wrist gear and read the search result. Let's see. Seems like in a typical prison camp, the maximum sentence for all crimes is death. Even just for a recreational spot of fraud, shouted Dokfu, shocked. Even just for low-key offing some clingy wanker, shouted Shung'er, shocked. So it seems. The minimum sentence for fraud is 10 years hard labor, and the minimum for murder is 25 years hard labor. No probation or suspended sentences either. Going to back out on relocating now? Maydeen smirked. No way, said Shung'er, glaring at the chief executive. It's still better than here. We'll be fine as long as we don't do anything wrong. Meanwhile, this planet's turning into hell in no time. I can't let that remark pass, Miss Shung'er, said Dokfu. You may be intent on leaving, but we're not. We're going to build an ideal society here. Right alongside Anguzen, she sniped coldly. Best of luck there. We'd like your zone to stay, too, Miss Shung'er. But why? If we leave, then you're a shoo-in for system premiere. Well, I don't think Anguzen will take that lying down, but at least one competitor will be out of your hair. If your zone were to vacate, this planet's future would be forfeit. You're the only ones who can give birth. Don't be stupid, said Shung'er, half rising out of her seat to slam the table. So, let me get this straight. You only need us around to bear your seed, is that it? We are not your broodmares. And you'd have Anguzen and his boys impregnate us? Well, think again, because we refuse, you hear me? We refuse. I didn't mean to say it'd only be to give birth, said Dokfu, visibly perplexed. We know you'll pitch in other ways, too, of course. And you'd be free to love, marry, and reproduce as you see fit. Plus, if you don't like the fuss of marriage, there's always artificial insemination. Forget it, she replied firmly, before turning to the chief executive. Now you see why we can't stay here. I'm willing to admit that was worded tactlessly, said Dokfu. But without fertile females, where does that leave this planet? It's not as though we can hold out for settlers from other systems for the foreseeable future. What do I care? If you ask me, this planet never had a future to begin with. If I may, said Jint, we can easily provide the planet with artificial childbirth tech. Rest assured the method is very safe. And there are plenty of territory nations that'll gladly provide you with egg cells and sperm. Jint was aware that in bringing that up, egg cells and sperm could very well be the first trade agreement he'd preside over as Count of Hyde. But the three of them just stood there, stiff as trees, looking at him. Judging by their faces, his suggestion wasn't even worth considering. We'll, think of that as a last resort, said Dokfu, breaking the silence with a dark look. Putting that aside, said Shung'er, we're leaving. I trust that's okay with you, Chief Executive. It can't be helped, said Maydeen. That being said, you are lower priority evacuees. First we evacuate the non-personnel, then the personnel, and then you. You should view us as non-personnel too. Surely you're joking. Look, we're not here because we ever wanted to be. We were tossed into this slammer by force. Just think about that. You're not getting to me with that poor excuse for an argument. You are criminals, yet here you are, making yourselves out to be victims. We're victims of society. You can say that at this late date if you like, but it's not going to get you anywhere. If you let us on first, then we won't have to sit here arguing back and forth like this. It's out of the question. The way Jint saw it, this fledgling land-world administration lacked any really qualified parties, and it was killing him inside that still didn't mean he could just choose for them. Frankly, he had no idea what to do from here. He could sense his thought patterns turning gradually more negative. All he wanted was for an experienced magistrate, whose line of work this actually was, to come take over the job that had been foisted upon them for no other reason than that she was an imperial and he was a noble. Not that they'd ever told them that was the reason, but what else could it reasonably be? If he were to lose just a tad more hope, he'd have half a mind to keep this fruitless conference spinning its wheels so as to buy time. At present, he was teetering on the verge. But at this juncture, it didn't matter whether or not they were averse to the idea. This was his and Leifier's assigned task. You can't be serious, balked Shunger, who then looked in Jin's direction. Could we meet in private over the first batch? If you insist it's necessary. But why can't we talk about it right here? I'd just like to make something clear beforehand. There are 2 preconditions for boarding. What preconditions? The consent of those boarding and the permission of the Land World Administration. That's right, said Maydeen. In case you aren't aware, I'm representing the Land World Administration. At least for the time being, that is. You can try working him, but it would be a waste of time. That is a petty-minded accusation, said Shunger, pounding on the table. Who are you calling loose here? Why would I do such a thing? I'm not saying you would be the one doing the seducing. You do, however, have a number of women as underlings, many of whom were prostitutes. You'd use them, of course. How vulgar. You should be ashamed of your mind being so in the gutter. You don't even know for sure if His Excellency the Count swings that way. Shunger pointed at Jint. Then, suddenly, she faced where her finger was pointing with a worried look. Are you straight? Do I have to answer that? Thought Jint, lost and bewildered. You don't need to answer that, shouted Maydeen in Jint's stead. It has nothing to do with this meeting. I was just trying to ease the tension by bringing up a lighter topic, said Shunger, pounding the table yet again. A lighter topic? That's rich. Not to be outdone, Maydeen also pounded the table. You were trying to suss out whether you can strike a backroom deal. Ugh, you insist on painting me as trying to seduce His Excellency. Well, let me use this opportunity to say it point blank. No one likes you. Of course they don't. It's not my job to be popular with the inmates. Is abusing your authority your job, then? When have I ever abused my authority? I will not stand by this slander. Oh, let me count the ways. As their bickering, for it was far from a constructive debate from any point of view, continued to eat time, the desk continued to receive their punishment. After a while, Jint noticed Dokfa's entourage of prisoners gleefully counting on their hands. It seemed they were betting which side would end up slamming the table the most times. Please, that's enough, Jint shouted. Surprised, Maydeen and Shunger regarded him. Awkwardly, Jint cleared his throat. I'm asking you, please calm down. I don't know whether His Excellency the Chief Executive has abused his power, but I don't believe it. Maydeen looked away, never imagining he'd be so called into question. Jint ignored this. If you'd like to file complaints about each other, I ask that you do so elsewhere. And don't take this as a warning or anything like that, but just to allay any potential distrust, let me inform you that nothing good will come of trying to strike a backroom deal with me. We're just working by the request of a Land World Administration and have no intention of changing that framework. Besides, I'm a mere adjunct to the lady agent. Oh, now we know you ought to have asked Her Highness up in orbit whether she's straight, Maydeen mocked Shunger. I think you're taking it too far, Jint's inner Delctunian chimed in. Jint wasn't ultimately sure whether taking Maydeen up on his suggestion and asking Leifier would be considered an affront. In fact, he couldn't be sure whether it was even a meaningful question to ask. Unlike the Land World citizens of Delctu, the Off possessed an extremely unfettered philosophy on love, tending not to give much mind to trifling concerns like gender when love struck. Regardless, the values of Delctunian society were deeply ingrained in him, and so hearing Leifier's innermost personal details be fuel for their glib rejoinders rubbed him the wrong way. A friend of his most likely still living on Delctu, 1K Durin, suddenly came to mind. When Jin told Durin what he'd learned of love lives at the school he'd been attending, the boy had yelled, "But then there are no taboos to break. Where's the fun in that?" Then Durin smiled, adding, "I win. Forgive me." "I admit my tongue slipped," said Maydeen, but soon he hid his nervous agitation under an expressionless mask. "You're guilty of disrespecting the crown." Shunger pointed an accusatory finger at Maydeen. "I was told the lady agent is a member of the imperial family. The gall of it, to talk of her sexual preferences. You should be executed for offending the dignity of the sovereign." But once again, she faced Jint with a worried look. "That is a crime, right?" "I guess," said Jint evasively. Imperial law did severely punish offending the throne. On paper. He couldn't remember which emperor or empress had enacted the law, but he knew it was on the books. Only the realization that if it were actually enforced, then 2/3 of the gentry and every single noble, in other words, the majority of the entire race, would have to be executed, settled swiftly. As such, it was ignored in practice. This was hardly the only instance of pretending a problematic law didn't exist, either. The phenomenon riddled imperial history. Jint knew that much, but being on the less august end of the of nobility importance spectrum, he couldn't help but hesitate to get into all of that. "See," gloated Shunger. "You're done for, Maideen." The chief executive's face turned white as a sheet. "But that doesn't apply to land world citizens," said Jint, still electing not to divulge the whole truth about the law. "There you have it," Maideen smiled with evident relief. Then he blew up again. "Besides, you're the one who started it by asking people whether they're straight. His Excellency is a count. If I'm guilty of offending the crown, so are you. A count is nobility, not royalty. And not an imperial, either." She gave Jint a worried look. "Right? Of course, they're all different." But Jint was fed up with this whole topic. "Now, let's get back to the main point of discussion, shall we?" Right, of course," said Maideen. "What were we talking about?" "Boarding priority, if I recall." "Which is for the Land World Administration to decide," stated Jint. "My sitting here won't help in that regard." Yes. "So, it's a question of onboard habitability, correct?" "That and occupancy limit," Jint added. "Right. The limit being 8,000, yes? What exactly will the journey be like?" Luckily, the relevant files had been sent to Jint's risk gear from the command center of the transport unit by then. This unproductive back and forth had its upside, namely, buying him the time he'd needed. The 8,000 figure is predicated on dividing the main hold into 3. Jint projected the ship's layout map from his wrist gear. "We can do it given a little construction work, but you would have to bring any sort of bedding with you from the land world surface, since the only onboard bedding is for the crew. Also, there will be 20,000 square dag of space per person, not taking into account common areas like hallways and the like." "Any space for luggage?" 1 million square dag per person. "That's not much. If that's the case," said Shunger, "let us have it. More of us can board at a time, since none of us has much of anything to bring aboard. I said non-personnel civilians are highest priority, and that's final." Maideen began working the terminal by him. A moment later, he was done. Narrowing down the criteria to children, the elderly, and their guardians and care practitioners, that makes 1,867 people. "We'll have them board first." "And the other 6,143 people?" asked Shunger immediately. "The other 6,133 people, you mean," Maideen corrected her. "We'll send our household goods instead. That way we'll be able to enjoy a comfortable journey later, taking only a minimal amount of personal effects." Shunger began pounding the table anew. "Please calm down. You must recognize his right to determine the priori. How can I be calm?" Shunger interrupted. "Once the chief executive leaves this planet, we might be forced to ask Dokfu or even Anguzan for permission to emigrate. Do you think they'll just let us go?" "She's got a point," thought Jint, taken aback. She was right. Once Maideen was out of the picture, evacuating the women seemed a difficult proposition. "I'm appalled by your words," said Dokfu, clasping his hands. "I can't speak for Mr. Anguzan, but should I become system premier, know that I will not suppress your freedom. If you want to relocate, I will support your wishes. I haven't lost my touch just yet. I'm not going to buy into the promises of a con man like you," she potshot. "That scenario hadn't occurred to me," said Maideen, who also seemed not to take Dokfu's word for it. "Okay, I'll fly out last. I'll have you all board before me." "Spoken like a true chief executive," said Shunger. "At least I know I'm more trusted than Dokfu or Anguzan, which isn't a bad feeling." Then Maideen frowned. "Wait, is this even something to be pleased about?" "I'd be pleased if I were you," said Shunger. The air in the room had suddenly taken a turn for the cheerful, with Dokfu alone staring on grimly. Actually, Jint wasn't feeling too sunny either. "Your Excellency, it appears I need to revise the schedule," said Maideen. "Right. We need to accommodate more people now," Jint sighed. "It'll be fine," consoled Shunger. "The West Zone has the smallest population." "Around how many people?" asked Jint, not hoping for much. Around 100,000.